Dr. V. Chandrasekhar is working as lecturer in philosophy in the Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda College since 1996. He has been awarded the degree of PhD by the University of Madras for his work in the area Yoga and Analytical Psychology. He has been teaching Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, and recent European philosophy for undergraduate and postgraduate students. He has participated in many seminars and presented papers in a variety of topics. He has also reviewed 2 books in Ethics and Indian Culture published by the Tamil Nadu Textbook Society for Plus 2 course.
Welcome to the UGC series of lectures in philosophy. Here we will be dealing with Greek philosophy. Our syllabus talks of Greek philosophy in 2 parts, namely Greek philosophy 1 and Greek philosophy 2. As I mentioned in the last episode, we can understand the philosophy of the Greeks in terms of 3 periods, namely the pre-Socratic period, the period in which you have the sophists to Aristotle, and then the 3rd period which deals with the post-Aristotelian thinker. Greek philosophy 1, our syllabus says, contains thinkers from Thales, which comes 600 years before the advent of Christ, to Aristotle, including Socrates, Plato, Xenophon, etc., etc. Here, this Greek philosophy 1 we dealt with in 2 parts earlier. This will be the 3rd part of this series. In the last episode, we talked about some of the pre-Socratic thinkers, especially with respect to Thales. In this episode, we will continue our talk on the pre-Socratic philosophers. Then we will deal with the development of the thought of Anaximander and Anaximenes. Then we will also introduce the religion of the Orphics. Here, as I mentioned earlier, we have the philosophical insight from 600 centuries before the advent of Christ. Why is it so? This is the period when man started to understand the nature of the world in terms of his own independent thinking. Hence, it is termed as philosophy. Here, we have thinkers, especially Thales, who spoke about an ultimate principle. Especially the Greek philosophy can be characterized as a philosophy which looks into the nature of the world in terms of an ultimate principle. However, these thinkers differed from one another in naming that ultimate principle. We saw in the last episode that Thales names that ultimate principle as water. However, we are going to have other thinkers who named that ultimate principle differently. That is what we will be dealing with now. The thinker that I introduced earlier in the last episode is Anaximander from 624 BC to 546 BC. He is said to be a student of Thales. He is a great philosopher of the Ionic school after Thales. As I said, the Ionia coast of Greece, where you have the main place called Miletus, has produced a good number of philosophers, especially Thales comes from that, and this Anaximander is a student of Thales. He too has written, has spoken on various subjects like philosophy, astronomy, and he is also said to have constructed the map for the first time. He too held the ultimate principle of things to be material and holds it to be indefinite matter. Like Thales, Anaximander talks of a ultimate principle that underlies the universe. Of course, all the Greek philosophers, especially the pre-Socratics, talks of a ultimate principle that underlines the whole universe. Anaximander also talks of such an ultimate principle like his master Thales. However, Anaximander differs from Thales in the sense that he names that ultimate principle to be an indefinite matter. He does not name it to be water, air, fire. Instead, he calls it as an indefinite matter. He does not call it as some matter, because earth, fire, air, etc., everything comes from this indefinite matter according to Anaximander. Now, why does he talk of this ultimate matter as indefinite? According to Anaximander, this ultimate matter is indeterminate in quality and illimitable in quantity. Anaximander held that the ultimate principle of things is material and holds it to be indefinite matter. this indefinite matter, he calls it as apeiron. Here, as I told you earlier, Anaximander, like his teacher Thales, also regards an ultimate principle that governs the whole universe. But he differed from Thales in naming that ultimate principle to be an indefinite matter and not water as did Thales, because water, fire, air, etc., everything comes from this indefinite matter according to Anaximander. As I said, he called this the apeiron. What is this apeiron? What is the definition of this? Let us see that now. Apeiron, that which surrounds everything boundlessly, that from which all heavens and all the worlds come into being. All that comes from this indefinite matter returns to it at death. According to Anaximander, this indefinite matter, the apeiron, is something that governs, that surrounds the whole universe boundlessly. The universe extends. Therefore, that which surrounds also should be extending. Hence, he says that apeiron surrounds this universe boundlessly. Secondly, it is that from which the heavens, the world where we live, everything has come into being. And he also says that once these things come into existence from that, at the time of decay, they go back to this particular indefinite matter. Therefore, he calls it as indefinite. Now, if matter is supposed to be of this size or this shape, then we cannot expect many things from that. That is why he calls it as indefinite matter. Let us see Anaximander's views now. Matter is indeterminate in quality and illimitable in quantity. That is, when I talk of matter to be of this shape, this size of a particular number, we are restricting that matter to a particular size or shape or whatever it is. If we do that, then how can we account for the innumerable worlds? Of course, the Greeks talks of innumerable worlds that have come into existence from this ultimate principle, be it matter or water or air. Now, if we talk of matter to be of a particular shape or size, how can we account for this universe which is extending? Hence, Anaximander talks of this matter to be indeterminate in quality. Secondly, he says that it is illimitable in shape. Why? The world extends, the universe extends, therefore its cause should also extend. It cannot be limited. Therefore, he says that it is illimitable in quantity. Secondly, what is the reason for this? If there were a limited amount of matter, it would long ago have been used up in the creation of innumerable worlds. As I told you earlier, the Greeks talk of innumerable worlds that have come into existence from this matter. If matter is restricted either in quality or in quantity, then how can we account for the innumerable worlds that have come out of this matter? There is so much of things that we have, a myriad of things with a variety of qualities. How can we account for them if you are going to say that matter is of this size or this shape? Therefore, he talks of matter as indefinite, as indeterminate and illimitable. But the importance of Thales of Anaximander is that he speaks of the method, the process by which the world has come into existence from this indefinite matter. We saw in the last episode regarding water to be the ultimate source by Thales. He does not talk of how the world has evolved out of the water. He just says that the ultimate principle is water and the world has evolved, whereas Anaximander talks of a process by which the world has evolved out of the indeterminate process. Let us see that now. Transformation of matter into world and beings. First, there is the indeterminate matter. As I said, matter is indeterminate and indefinite, illimitable. That is the first thing that we have. This matter separated itself into two, namely the hot substance and second the cold substance. The earth forms the center of this cold substance. When fire surrounds the center of the cold substance, which is watery, which is like a fluid, the fluid evaporates. This evaporated fluid becomes air, and this air now pressurizes the fire that surrounds the earth. what happens is the fire bursts. It bursts into wheel shaped husks, something like cartwheels. There are three types of cartwheels which comprises the sun, the moon and the stars. The farthest is the sun and the closest is the moon. This is how Anaximander explains it. But do we see these wheel shaped husks, these cartwheels? No. Why don't we see that? According to Anaximander, these wheels, the cartwheels, are surrounded by thick vapor. As a result, we are not able to see these wheel shaped husks. However, there are slight apertures, something like pipe like holes through which the fire gleams. As I said, the heat is something like a fire. Why don't we see them? This is because of the thick vapor that encrusts the whole type of the wheel shaped husks. But through the apertures, we are able to see the miniature fires through which the sun, moon and the stars gleam. Of course, moon is taken to be a hot substance, unlike what we know today. Moon is said to be a cold substance which reflects the light of the sun today as per the sciences. But at the time of Anaximander, moon also forms part of the hot substance. This is how we saw the philosophy of Anaximander. Let us see them in points now. The earth originally was like a fluid. It was surrounded by the hot matter. The heat from the hot matter made the waters to evaporate into vapor. The vapor expanded and burst into wheel-shaped husks. The husks are covered with thick vapor, but there are pipe-like holes through which fire gleams. This causes the appearance of sun, moon and stars. Earth, according to Anaximander, is cylindrical and not spherical. Here I must tell you that Anaximander consists of Earth as a type of cylinder and not spherical as we know today. And man, according to Anaximander, lives at the top of this cylinder. Does Anaximander talk of man? However, with the case of the Greeks, especially the pre-Socratics, they spoke only about the nature of the world. They tried to explain how the world came into existence. They never bothered about the explanation of man. There are certain explanations about man, but it is all in connection with explanation of the world. They explain man in terms of a part of this world. That is the type of explanation that we have in the case of Anaximander. Then we also saw about his conception of man. However, as I told you earlier, the conception of man comes in the philosophy of the Greeks only with reference to the nature of the world. They are not trying to explain about man in toto. Instead, they try to explain man as part of nature. This point we must bear in mind. Now, let us see Anaximander's view of man. According to Anaximander, man was conceived in the first place as part of the cold substance, that is something like a fish. Just as you have the fish that floats in the water, Anaximander conceived of man as a kind of a fish. Let us see that now. Living beings produced when the fluid like earth began to dry up. That is, first we had the cold substance. This cold substance, due to the heat that surrounds, began to evaporate. As a result, the water, the fluid on the earth evaporated and more land came into picture. Now, these living beings were produced when this fluid like earth began to dry up. Secondly, man was conceived in the beginning like a fish in the water. This point I told you earlier, namely, just as fish floats in water, man was conceived by Anaximander to float in the earth, fluid like earth. That's how it was conceived earlier. But once the earth started to dry up, the man from the cold part, namely like the fish, migrated into the land. Let us see that now. When the water dried up, he migrated to land. In fact, it is also said by Anaximander that the fins that were there to man when he was part of the cold substance transformed, evolved into the parts of man that are suited for life in land. this is the type of view that Anaximander talks of a living being. As I said, Anaximander, being a student of Thales, has spoken about the nature of the world, the evolution of the world in a much more clear form than that of Thales. Now we go to the next philosopher, namely Anaximenes. Anaximenes, 585 BC to 528 BC. Of course, I must remind you that these dates are from whatever sources that are available, and we cannot take it to be sure. Let us see what he has to say. Anaximenes is a third of the trio of Milesian philosophers. He is said to be a pupil of Anaximander. As I said earlier, Thales, Anaximander are the important philosophers from the Ionian coast of Miletus. The next philosopher that we see from the same place is Anaximenes. He is said to be a student of Anaximander. Thus we have a student-teacher relationship from Thales to Anaximenes. Anaximenes too maintained the first principle of all things to be an infinite principle, but specified that principle to be air. Here I must tell you, Anaximenes, like Thales, like Anaximander, and like other Greek philosophers, spoke about the ultimate principle that governs the whole world. But the philosophy of Anaximenes seems to be better than Thales and Anaximander, in the sense that Anaximenes, like Thales, talks of a particular substance, while Thales called that substance to be water, Anaximenes calls that substance to be air. But this Anaximenes, who is a student of Anaximander, talks of a particular substance rather than an indefinite matter like Anaximander. That is the difference that we have between Anaximander and Anaximenes, Anaximenes and Thales. Anaximenes talks of an ultimate principle like Thales, but he defines it as air. Now, why does Anaximenes talk of air as the first principle? The origin of air theory seems to have been suggested to Anaximenes by the fact that air in the form of breath is the principle of life. We know that air in the form of breath is the principle of life. This, scholars say, might be the reason which prompted Anaximenes to talk of air as the ultimate principle. Here we see that though like Thales he talks of an ultimate principle in the form of an element, he differs from Thales in the sense that he talks of air. But why does he take of air? To him, everything comes out of air and everything goes back to air. How? This is the point that we have to see now, how he develops his views. Air stretches illimitably through space, and air is constantly in motion, and this motion brought about the development of the universe from air. According to Anaximenes, air extends throughout the space. It is illimitable. Can we limit air? Can we say that air is here, air is there, air is everywhere? So Anaximenes says that the substance that exists everywhere should be the ultimate principle, hence he calls it as air. Now, air is constantly in motion. This motion, according to him, develops the world. In other words, the world has evolved out of this motion of air. This he talks of in two steps, that he calls it as rarefaction and condensation. What is rarefaction and what is condensation? Rarefaction I have given in the slide, growing hot, and condensation I have given there as growing cold. In other words, we can say rarefaction is becoming thin and condensation is becoming thick. Now, Anaximenes talks of a particular method by which this air becomes the whole universe. That is, the air, when it becomes thick, it forms something, and when it becomes thin, it forms certain other things. That is how we have the evolution of the whole world. Let us see that through a slide. Air, when it rarefies, you have fire and the stars. When the condensation of air takes place, you have first the wind, and when further condensed, it becomes cloud. When the air gets further condensed, you have water, from which you get earth, and the further condensation of air leads to the stones and the other objects of the world. That is, Anaximenes tries to explain quality in terms of quantity. I can give a small example, a particular example that we know here. We talk of the audio CDs. The CDs contains songs. Let us say we have some film songs in the CDs. A particular CD might contain 10 songs. A particular CD might contain 5 songs. A particular CD might contain 16 songs, depending upon the duration of the songs. But if you take up a particular CD, that CD's capacity is only 650 MB or 700 MB. That is the volume that it can contain. Now it contains 10 songs or 5 songs or 6 songs, depending upon the duration. However, we have a different type of CD wherein we can record songs through a particular format called MP3 format. Here, when you record songs in the MP3 format in the CD, you can have at least about 100 to 150 songs. Now compare the CD that has got 10 songs and the CD that has got 150 songs. Here what has happened is the MP3 format condenses the whole content. That is how we have 150 songs in the same amount of 600 MB. Similarly, Anaximenes says that air, when it condenses, you have the wind, cloud, water, earth and all the objects including humans. Whereas when it becomes thin, you have the fire, stars, sun, moon, etc. This is the process that he gives for explaining the evolution of the world through air. Anaximenes seems to suggest an organic unity, holds that air embraces everything, human souls and their world. Here Anaximenes tries to talk of the world in an organic whole. That is, air is a kind of a whole in which you have the world. The world, which comprises of the existing objects in the world, the rivers, water, fire and also human beings, all are encompassed in air. This is how Anaximenes talks of this principle. Now a final word about the Milesians. Thales, Anaximander and Anaximenes hails from this Ionian coast city called Miletus, hence they are called Milesians. A final word about them. Milesians were both scientists and philosophers. As I told you earlier, philosophy, which began sometime around the 600 centuries before the advent of Christ, was considered to be philosophy for the simple reason that the thinkers spoke about the world, its nature, its cause, everything purely on independent basis. They did not depend on mythologies, they did not depend on religious texts. Instead, they spoke about the existence of the world through their own independent thinking. Hence, they are independent thinkers who are termed as philosophers and scientists. Scientists generally observe and then give their verdict. Similarly, the Milesians observed the world, the nature of the world and then gave their verdict about this particular world. Secondly, they are also philosophers because they spoke about the ultimate existence of the ultimate cause of this world. Hence, they are both philosophers and scientists. Now, there is another sect called the Orphics. The Orphics belong to a religious movement and this movement revolves around the mythic figure Orpheus. Nature and scope of this movement is not clear. Some confuse it with Pythagoreanism. Now, Orphism is a kind of a religious sect. It revolves around a particular mythic figure called Orpheus. Let us discuss about the contribution of the Orphics in detail in the next episode. Now, it is time for us to go to the summary of this particular episode. Anaximander and his theory of indefinite matter forms the first part of this episode. The second part deals with evolution of the universe from this matter. I spoke to you about how the matter transforms itself into the world. Third part of this episode deals with Anaximenes and his theory of air being the ultimate principle. Then we spoke about the evolution of the universe from air. Now let us see some of the important questions that pertain to this part of my lecture. They are: explain the transformation of indefinite matter into the world, that is of course as given by Anaximander. Then how different is the theory of Anaximander from that of Thales? Lastly, bring out the cosmology of Anaximenes. Let us continue this talk with the ideas of Orpheus in the next episode. Thank you.